Hopefully you see a large logo with a missing middle housing screen. Excellent, thank you. Good evening. Tonight, I want to provide an overview of the missing middle housing project, which we've been hearing about already tonight. The code and purpose of tonight's meeting is to present council with a draft of the missing middle housing legislation for Monday night's public hearing. That's next Monday. And to ensure the draft meets and implements some of the council policy for the development of missing middle, and to make any council requested modifications or clarifications prior to the public hearing. So developing code language for missing middle housing types, otherwise known as duplex, triplex, and cottages, was a part of the council work plan. And the purpose of the project is to establish a clear process and regulatory framework to allow greater diversity to meet these housing needs. This code would be implemented in a standalone code for uses that would be permitted outright in some form in each of our residential zones, to be reviewed under clear and objective standards and permitted through expedited permitting reviews. So before we dig into some of the draft regulations, I want to spend a minute on the missing middle housing code and some background information for those in attendance who may be less familiar with the project. Missing middle has been discussed quite a bit over the last couple of years, but this project really began to take hold upon completion of our 2020 Echo Northwest housing market report, along with the Hood River Housing Market Economics FAQs, where one of the questions asked and analyzed was, how can Hood River increase housing supply to positively impact housing affordability? And one of the responses identified from this question, and as identified in the report, really states that missing middle housing development is a key strategy for achieving a supply of units that are more affordable to more people. Missing middle development is a mix of residential housing types where size and number of units fall into between a traditional single family house and multifamily apartment building, and are compatible in the look and feel with single family detached homes. The middle housing units are generally smaller, making them more affordable than larger detached units while requiring less land than the current stock of detached units. From that finding, the city began advertising this project in its e-news, in its social media outlets, both in English and Spanish. We appeared on a radio spot to discuss the project. We ended up in the paper with some local media coverage. And then we developed a project-specific webpage to advertise and provide a landing spot for some information. We then proceeded to execute a contract with Sarah Architects to support some of the code graphics and to create some test fits of the code. And under staff direction, Sarah took on several of our code regulations, looked at some of our standard lots, took some input on our local code issues, some on-the-ground experience and cues from a number of other communities in the Pacific Northwest who have taken on similar projects like this to create prototypes and to shape the code to serve some level of predictability when it came to the outcome and development. This really led to some of our first drafts and some of the first code concepts, which many of you in council looked at and we've asked to provide some direction on, which really took shape over 10 council and planning commission public meetings. So this is meeting 11, all in the lead up of the council legislative hearing coming up. With that, I'd like to thank you all for the time, as well as planning commission and all the participants from the public and the development community who have been providing comments over these 10 meetings and offline as well. Really their voice and that input helped shape the project and the code as it looks today. So before we dig in to the 7 sections, I just wanted to take a quick pause and see if anyone has any questions yet. All right. The code itself is broken down into 7 sections. The first, definitions, is really important to clarify terms and jargon. This is supposed to be a clear and objective code, so it's important that we have common understanding of what some of the words mean. Height, floor area, they all can be subject to different interpretations. We want to provide a clear and written understanding within the code that that helps us reach common ground. There's a purpose statement. Why are we adding these regulations to the code? An applicability section. When does this code apply? Of course, when you make amendments, we have relationship to other regulations. How do we reconcile conflicts between this code and other parts of the code, which occasionally do happen? Exceptions and variances. How do we address unique circumstances within the code? Again, we try to make a code of general applicability. There's always some case where the circumstances don't fit that code. How do we address those? Land divisions. This code does allow for an expedited land division process. How do we process those divisions? How do we meet clear and objective standards when it comes to land divisions? And then last but not least, the last section in the code are the development standards themselves, which includes the bulk of the technical regulations in the code, and where I'm going to spend a vast majority of our time in this presentation to go through that analysis. So within the development standards, it's composed of 14 sections that cover mostly design and layouts. These are outlined in your packet. And for the purposes of the workshop, I want to highlight some of the policy issues in areas where we didn't receive some consensus between Planning Commission staff, and take council input on anything really included in the draft regulations that you have for clarification. Some of the key areas that I'm gonna pull out of this include the required site area for dwelling units, parking, stormwater, landscaping and tree preservation, dwelling size, building height, and then our catch-all miscellaneous section highlighting the issue of short-term rentals and building conversions. So digging right into your packet, on page 48, we start off with a section that breaks down the number of dwelling units for per square foot in each zone. This is a departure from per lot basis in your code now. As drafted, the middle housing code allows 1 dwelling unit for 2,500 square feet in R1, 1 dwelling unit per 1,500 square feet in R2, R3, and C1 when these units are over 800 square feet in size. And then 1 dwelling unit per 1,250 square feet within the R2, R3, and C1 zones when under 800 square feet in size, which was a Planning Commission recommendation to further incentivize the smaller, even the smallest units that we were contemplating. The section is important because it also sets a limit on the number of units per building and the maximum number of units per development that we would review. Again, this is a by right and outright permitted use subject to meeting these standards. So putting a cap on the number of dwelling units and limiting some of the size of the developments themselves was an important consideration.
Dustin, I think the language you have is the same in these two things. One should have said over, one should have said under, but they both say under. Is that correct?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, one per 1,500 square feet when over 800, 1 per 1,250 square feet when under.
Okay, I thought that's what you had in our other packet, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Dustin, in that realm of, and I'm remembering the chart in the packet, but is it over 800 but less than 1,200 or 1,500? It's not like over 800 to any amount, right?
Right. And in the code itself, we cap the size of the dwelling units. We're going to get ahead,
Oh,
but
sorry, okay.
we'll preview to that. There is a cap of 1,200 square feet for a unit that doesn't have an attached garage, and 1,500 square feet when it does. So, yeah, yes, it's not to the upward limit. It's to a ceiling, which is intentionally applied here. So in the packet, there's a side-by-side comparison, which is really not part of the code, but it was included because I think it provides a really good analysis on how the draft regulations have evolved from the baseline of your code now, initial drafts, planning commission recommendation, and then final draft. So it kind of provides a continuum of code options and how this sizes up as compared to today's code. Excuse me. As another note, during the code development and public hearing process before Planning Commission, we heard a number of requests about analyzing the code rather than using an area look at the number of dwelling units to looking at a floor area analysis that would allow building bonuses for development that built more units on a site, which is really based around the Portland infill project. So we performed a Hood River version of the infill code that looked at the FAR methodology and test fit some of these codes, which actually shows up here in this, we call it the green blob. Really upon closer analysis, without significantly curtailing your base zone allowances and the base zone rights like they did in Portland, the FAR model has a limit and doesn't guarantee some of our smaller units that we're targeting, which was really part of the project goal. And it wasn't recommended ultimately by Planning Commission or staff, but it was something we did look at. It was really helpful exercise to say, how do we start evaluating some of this code in different ways? Moving right along to parking, on page 50 of your packet, our new custom parking requirements for the middle housing. Two noteworthy regulations from the parking section are both the rate and parking location. After deliberation, Planning Commission recommended a reduction from the initial draft from 1 space per dwelling unit, which was the initial staff recommendation, to a 0.57 space per dwelling unit. A second issue where Planning Commission didn't reach a consensus was on the staff's recommendation to prohibit parking between the dwellings and the street. A recommendation that we placed and drafted to de-emphasize the presence of parking in the overall designs and to promote a dwelling first building orientation that is really more reminiscent to some of the traditional design layouts that we see. On pages 51 to 52, we discuss landscaping, which includes planting rates and tree preservation calculations. These regulations are intended to replace some of the existing lot coverage limits that control development today. They require a minimum amount of landscaping in planting both trees and shrubs, which is currently not within the code for smaller development. It mandates on-site tree planting, which is currently not required for smaller residential developments, and provides developer credits for tree preservation for sites that save on-site trees, which is also currently not granted by our code. On page 53, we do get to the unit size restriction. Initially, when we discussed this with you, we intended to not cap the unit size, but after taking some direction to narrow the gap between the base zone allowances and the middle housing code allowances, it really became necessary to cap the units in order to limit some of the unit size to really aim for a target audience or a target market of 100 to 125% MFI, which is really the entry market for the Hood River housing market delivered product. And we went through some of this with you in terms of looking at the past 5 years of sales within the city and where these general sizes showed up by way of real estate sales and transactions. we started covering height standards. These appear on pages 53 and 55. The code was drafted initially with a custom height calculation that was intended to promote some compact dwellings compatible with your traditional neighborhood designs. As deliberated, Planning Commission did not recommend a height change, but recommended that the city address the height issue and height calculations within the code citywide. Staff agrees that a citywide look to reevaluate height calculations would be beneficial. However, we did not recommend incorporating the existing height regulation for these particular housing units, but instead use the customized approach that takes into account some of the different roof types, some of the housing forms, some infill restrictions that we're going to face, and really is more accustomed for a smaller plan development. So within your packet and draft, we've included the revised methodology recommended by staff that we believe best fits the compact middle development housing and doesn't perpetuate some of the issues that we currently see with our existing height regulations. Further, within your packet, you'll see a recommendation to allow a pitched roof up to 28 feet tall in height, as well as an allowance to allow a shed style roof to be up to 25 feet. This is a bit of a departure from the initial code. This came based on some developer feedback that we received, and the proposed illustrations that guide some of this are included in public testimony on page 98. We have to thank Joe Sager for elaborating some of these. He's a local developer and started outlining this in graphics and some of the allowances that they recommended. On page 57 comes somewhat of our miscellaneous section of the code. 3 important policies that are included in this section involve ADUs and not allowing ADUs. The code addresses smaller units already as independent units, and therefore it doesn't rely on some sort of accessory designation or status to allow a similar small unit type development that we see in ADUs. It also allows these units to be built as a part of a development as standalone or attached. So they receive the benefits of being fee simple and saleable, whereas our existing ADU designations do not allow that to happen. They must be accessory to something. Second, short-term rentals. Planning Commission did make a recommendation to not allow these units built under this code to be allowed as short-term rentals. We don't disagree with that, but we also, prior to ordinance, staff continues to investigate some of the feasibility of administering this and making sure we're not running into conflicts with the permitted status of these uses. If they're permitted outright, can we attach conditions of approval for the short-term rental designation? And we'll be back to you with some additional information on that.
Dustin, do you mean permitted outright by they might be in the C zone? Is that what you mean by that?
Permitted outright meaning they go straight to building permit. There is no, they're permitted uses. They go right there. They're not subject to discretionary standards or conditions. And lastly, which includes an important clause, a conversion clause within this section that would allow a single family dwelling that existed today to be converted into four dwellings, so long as that dwelling was able to meet some of the parking area requirements and some of the area requirements for that particular zone. So for example, if a single family home was in an R2 zone and it was on a lot of 6,000 square feet, it could be allowed to be divided, and depending on the unit size, it could be divided into a 4-unit development. So those are really the high points of the code. Again, the purpose is to really further the city's housing goal, allow some more efficient use of our residential land supply, support the development of a diverse housing stock, provide opportunities for small dwelling development within existing neighborhood, increase opportunities for home ownership, and provide opportunities that is compatible with our existing neighborhoods. The provisions within this code are intended to support that goal and to promote compatible development through clear and objective standards. So for council, there's two places that I highlighted in the code where staff and planning commission did not reach a consensus. That falls under the height methodology and the restrictions on location for front yard parking. And so prior to your legislative hearing next week, we would like to ensure that the council's draft to be presented at your public hearing incorporates your recommended approaches to these issues, especially these two issues, and anything else that appears in the drafted code provisions. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have from items within the code. And again, thank you for the time. Thank you for reaching out and investing time in this. So.
Thank you, Dustin. That was great. It's a big packet, a lot of information. And we kind of had an overview on this a few times with a few little items, but this is the whole ball of wax. So they say. So that's a lot to digest, but there's a lot of detail in here. And I think it's really good that we have this detail because it'll make it so much easier for developers to know what they can and can't do. And it's just, like you said, clear and objective when we get finished with it. So that'll be great. So we have, I don't know how many questions or comments counselors might have on a lot of different subjects that have to do with this whole packet, but maybe we could just talk about the two things that you need taken care of, or let us have some discussion on those first. And then we could kind of veer off into other areas. Unless somebody, when we start talking about parking and building height, it kind of veers off into another area related to that. So I think maybe we should just start with those if people are amenable to that. So let's start with building height, if you guys are all right with that, because that's one of the things that Planning Commission wanted to basically leave that to a citywide discussion because it doesn't seem clear sometimes what we have going with that, and it needs to be fixed and tweaked, and the city's talked about it for quite some time, but we haven't gotten to it. But staff would like to put something onto this middle housing code. So there was kind of a difference in opinion on how that should be done, basically. And if we did it through this code, is this the right, are these the right numbers, even if we did it through this code? So I guess the question of leaving it to a different time, maybe we should tackle that first. Because if we should leave it to a different time, we don't need to be having a big, long discussion on it. We would just leave it the way it is now and tackle it citywide later. So opinions. Jessica.
I'm comfortable tackling it now, and then, maybe it's next year, the work plan includes that citywide height overview, but I was supportive of staff's approach to include it in this code.
So you're saying leave it to later or do not leave it to later?
No, do not leave it to later.
Do not leave it to later.
Yeah,
okay.
The way that staff has put it in is, I support that.
Okay, of doing it now. So we're just talking about doing it now. I'm not talking about what the numbers are in the draft. I'm just saying, should we do it now or should we do it later? Anyone, Mark?
Yeah, first a question for Dustin, I think, which is this what we expect to be the rule set for single family and townhouse later? I mean, is this the new heights rules and then we're going to implement those in those other code sections, or is this always going to be a unique set of height requirements?
You could make that choice. That is a choice you could make when you evaluate it citywide. I think when we talked about it earlier, the idea, you're going to have a bunch of options. If you take a citywide approach, you're going to have a bunch of policy choices to make. Whether you want a single unified height restriction across every zone, across every use, whether it's C2, whether it's next to an arterial corridor, whether it's multifamily, whether it's high density residential, we're going to have a pretty robust policy discussion before we get to this. So you would have a right to choose whether to change this later as well. It may be something you intentionally want to keep different. You will have an opportunity to look at that. So it's the choices, even though it may be changed or customized for this now, council is going to have a choice and see how does this fit in later. You may want to bring it up later. You may want to push down or adopt this for single family homes. You're going to have that choice. How do you choose to deal with each of these pieces? So
in my head, it was definitely just going to the residential zones and not beyond that. Does this code put middle housing at a disadvantage compared to other permitted uses? So, because we're sort of offering a slate of options, but it's still the market to decide which one to build. And with the proposed building heights, is it competitive to the other permitted uses?
it would be shorter. It would eliminate most likely a third story option. But those are some of the kind of the trade-offs between increasing the number of dwelling units, but intending to keep them smaller dwelling units. I think that's some of the infill tension that we see is when we see a 38-foot flat top building go in, we start talking about compatibility with existing infill. This is intended to limit some of those outliers. So it provides an incentive for the pitched roof, the most incentive at 28 feet now, and becomes increasingly restrictive when you start looking at flat roof buildings. So it starts providing different ways to address different building heights and styles that we don't look at now.
Right. So switching to opinion kind of things is I sort of like it in this code. I like the added thing for the pitched roof, because then you get the bigger eaves, which I think is a compatibility enhancement for neighboring properties, which I think is an important aspect of this. I guess my only concern is that is it giving a competitive disadvantage to middle housing? I don't mind going back into the other residential things in the near term and making those follow the same type of rules. But I don't know. I guess that's my opinion. Is I think I'm hip to this being in this code, but we should talk about competitiveness.
Megan?
I'm gonna follow that. So yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with staff, and honestly, I think even probably agreeing with the builders of our current height methodology, code-wide, citywide, needs work. I would really like to address it all together at once, because I do think having more requirements and more restrictive requirements for middle housing is just going to flip everyone back to the townhouse system, and they won't actually be using this code, which is incredibly counter to what I want out of this code. So I can see the real value in addressing height everywhere, in a near-term timeline, but I don't want to make this have a different height limit than anything else in our code, even if it's only just for a year or two.
Tim or Eric?
Thanks, Mayor. I guess just a couple of questions, and just for clarification. So the height requirements, how will that result in more middle housing? That's my first question.
it's a part of the package. I guess the idea would be, we're looking at promoting smaller units. The number of dwellings that would be permitted on a lot still is increased. Number of units still goes up, even though the height that they're allowed does not. So in terms of the number of units, it wouldn't necessarily change it. Size and amount of those units may change.
Do you view those changes as being positive then, I suppose?
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Do you view those changes as positive?
Yeah, I think if the goal is to promote some compatibility and keep target a dwelling unit size, I think that, I don't know if it's positive, it's in line with the goal, opinion aside. So
I guess like kind of feeds into my second question. And again, these are just for clarification, is that, we're being asked to make a decision on this building issue, building height issue, which seems to revolve around a lot about estimation methodology, different estimation methodology. So really, what basically is the problem that's being fixed?
So the issue with the current code is the concern or exposure would be allowing significantly more bulk on a third story. The existing code also relies on pre-development grades, which when you look at multiple small units on a site that are compact and put together, we could get some variability, and trying to blend, like this house may be 28 feet starting here. This house may be 28 feet starting here. We're trying to look at post-development grade to where we start looking at stormwater features, common driveways, common elements. These things are all tied into common features that the site will need to be balanced out. And I think there's some exposure with our current code, just based on methodology, on how it's built around typically one building on one site. It makes a whole lot more sense that way. The other issue is, again, going back to scale, if we're looking at development unit increases on a lot that can be anywhere between 50 to 100%, being mindful of a gentle density as your neighboring property increases is also a feature. So with that, the pitched roof now starts looking at benefits that in an architectural configuration that starts looking at air and light and proximity, which in a pitched roof, you will have more air and light to neighboring uses. Whereas our current code provides no incentive to include a pitched roof. In fact, it's a disincentive to a pitched roof. That's why we see large flat roof buildings. This code specifically starts to address that and really become tailored to what is ideally supposed to be a compact, smaller development configuration. I guess that's my professional look at and why I started drafting it that way.
Yeah, thanks. That's very helpful.
Eric, did you have any questions or thoughts on whether we should kind of go with a height change for this, or whether we should look at it citywide?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor.
At the same time.
Yeah, and of all the issues, I may be least focused on this one, but I keep a real open mind on this. But having heard Dustin just now, I mean, it seems like there's a specific reason to have these shorter height requirements in this code as compared to perhaps other portions of our code, because of the importance of focusing on the smaller units. And if we wait to tackle it and just have the height requirements for the rest of the code just sort of apply by default, it does seem like we lean toward more of kind of the townhome model, which is not what we're driving at here. We are driving at smaller units. So I think if we're just focusing on what the problem is and what we're trying to do about it, it seems like having these height requirements in is better than having them out. So I guess I would favor keeping them in, and we can always revisit that later when we take a citywide approach.
Okay. I'm gonna, oh, Gladys, I'm not sure if you can, I think you might be driving. I'm not sure, because I think you were gonna be on your phone, and I don't know if you can talk, but I want to give you an opportunity if you want to weigh in here, if you can. Just wait a second and see if she's able to get on. Well, we'll go ahead. She may not be able to do that while she's driving. So we'll just go ahead. Mark?
Yeah, I wasn't clear where the planning commission came, what was their recommendation with respect to this? I understand that there's a difference, but I don't know what it is. So.
I'm sorry, Planning Commission's recommendation was to rely on the existing city's height measurement methodology, just not provide a custom one that was unique to the middle housing code. Which is
And tackle it later, later, because they need to tackle it anyway, citywide. So look at it at that point. So the current code, if I can clarify, I hope I have this right, Dustin. The current code is 28 feet across the board for any type of roof, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so what this will do is it would, if you can build a pitched roof, you still get your 28 feet. But if you don't build a pitched roof, you're penalized compared to the current code. Correct?
Correct.
Correct. Okay, so that's the difference. So it will incentivize, or it would incentivize, supposedly it will incentivize you to build a pitched roof. A roof that's a shed roof is less expensive. A roof that's a shed roof, sometimes you can slope the whole thing to the south and get solar panels on all of it. So I just want to give another side here for a shed roof. It doesn't look quite like a lot of some of the older homes. They weren't built that way here. But there are reasons that people do those shed roofs. They're less expensive. You can stack more solar panels on the south side. And townhomes are built that way for other reasons, for views and things like that. And you can get another story sometimes, or a partial story under those. Now, we're already going to limit the square footage. We already know that. So it might mean potentially there could be the difference between a unit being built that you couldn't put another story in. But I don't know. The houses are so small anyway. I don't know if that actually in reality would happen. Megan, do you have something?
Yeah, I guess I'd like Dustin to clarify. So if all the different roof types are limited to this 20-foot eave height, are you actually being penalized for a shed roof? Because presumably the eave height tells you your actual livable area. So are they not all the same?
In the actually shed, in both the shed has a 20, I think the recommendation is 25 feet on the upper side, which would allow, it's essentially a 3-foot variance from where we're at now. I think the intent out of this is to limit these to really to 2-story dwellings rather than a 3rd story. 28 feet under the current code can be administered, if you will, to allow a 38-foot, depending on the site, a 38-foot dwelling, which is why, Eugene Street is a really good example. Those elevations on the river facing side of Eugene are nowhere near a 28-foot elevation. We're talking 38 feet from finished original grade. The houses are dug out. So you're seeing 40+ feet, 4 stories on that side. This is really to look at that and to not look at this and allow a 3+ story building to be built. limited to 2-story to those compact, more traditional neighborhood feels.
So is the issue where you're measuring grade from that you can get up to 38 feet, or is the issue the roof type?
Both. Because if you look at, again, at where you measure the grade from, it's 38 feet to a flat roof building, which if you have a flat roof building within 5 feet of your residence, that facade within 5 feet of you is really bulky. You know, there's no step back for a pitched roof from your property. It's plain. And a lot of the bulk of that building ends up at the 3rd story and above. So it's not just the floor area, it's where does the floor area occur? When the floor area occurs 28 feet or 20 feet above the ground, it becomes more significant by way of overall mass of the building. So no one really is concerned that the footprint or the floor area on the ground level is bulky. It's once you start getting up high, that's when it becomes really more noticeable and perceived. Does that help dive into some of the method? And that methodology is not accounted for in our current code and those impacts.
I guess I still need clarity of, does the setting a limit for the lower eave height, does that limit the height of your story for living in? Like your 1st and 2nd floors?
No, not necessarily, not the eave height. It'll really only take account for a 3rd story.
Jessica?
Yeah, I guess just to add, my thoughts is I don't think that the current plan is working. And I think what I'm hoping for this middle, currently how we do the heights, I don't think it's working. What I was hoping for this missing middle is that what comes out of it are things that are compatible with the neighborhood, because what's being built right now is not compatible. And what comes out of this are things that are compatible with the neighborhood, where the community feels like, oh, this is a great thing. I'm so glad we're doing this. I want to buy one of those. And so that's where I would rather go ahead and fix the height issue now for this. And, next year let's tackle, because I do think that talking about heights citywide, even if it's just even residential, could have a lot of variances that we want to talk about. So I don't think that would be a simple project. But I think we could do that next year, and I would like to do this one with this.
Mark, did you have your hand up? Oh, okay. All right. So I think I've got, I definitely have, I believe, 3 people that want to just incorporate it in, whatever it is. Megan did not want to. I did not want to. Tim, did you ask questions, but I'm not sure I heard where you were with whether you wanted to put something in now or leave it to decision for later and leave it like it is citywide.
Honestly, I'll be honest with you, that I'm on the fence on it. I'm still trying to grapple whether it's a problem that really needs to be fixed. I agree with some of what you said, Mayor, with respect to the solar panel aspect of it. And so there are situations where I think it would be beneficial to have that type of roof.
You know what, Dustin? I think you have the same decision, one of the same situations you had with the Planning Commission on this one. We kind of have a split ideas on this. We're kind of split on this. And this isn't a public hearing. I don't know what to tell you to do here. Do you have any suggestions, Rachel?
Yeah, that's okay, Mayor. Actually, the conversation is helpful, and
Okay.
we'll go back and see if there's more information we can provide or some additional options. So it's
Okay.
helpful. Thank you.
Okay. For the people who thought that we should just go with what we have in the code that Dustin has suggested, that staff has suggested, are you okay with what those numbers are for for those of you that thought this code was all right. Are you okay with those numbers? Mark, okay. Eric? Are you okay with those numbers? You are, okay, all right. So you've got the information. That's where we are. All right, parking, great. Or not, that was building height. So parking. How many and where? Those are the questions, right, Dustin?
Correct. Those are the questions. A significant part of the of site layout includes how many cars you're going to accommodate and require, the tension of putting those on site and impacting or consuming some of the developable area, or not requiring them on site and having that tension of I think you've heard of additional demands on off-street parking on the streets and how those are used. Second issue, so that's a number requirement. The second issue is location. I think one of the key points in the design standards was not allowing parking between the dwelling units and the street, alongside the buildings, tucked under the buildings, beyond the buildings were going to be acceptable outcomes. It just limits really the impact of parking and the predominance of off-street parking in the front of these dwellings.
Okay. I would have to say that, you know, in the packets and in the information that came to Planning Commission and emails that I received, and I don't know if this is true for others, I did not really have many comments on density of buildings, but I had a lot of comments about parking. And most of the comments were about off-street parking and how many we were going to have or we weren't going to have. So that seemed to be quite a subject that the public was very interested in. So we have 3/4 of a space per unit. And in reality, I asked Dustin about this today. I said, well, if you've got a unit and it requires 3/4 of a space, in reality, you're requiring one space. I mean, you're not going to build 3/4 of a space. So it doesn't really affect anything until you get to the 4th unit. Because for 2 units, you're going to have 1.5, which is going to mean you're going to have 2. So 1 for each. For 3 units, you're going to have 2.25. So that's going to be 3 units because you have to go up to the next unit. It's when you get to 4 units that you're going to only have 3 parking spaces. So it's not in reality going to affect anything until you get to the 4th unit on the site. So I think this 3/4 of a space is, you know, that's kind of what we need to think about when we're talking about 3/4 of a space per unit. And we don't have anything about how big the unit is, if it's a 400 square foot studio or a 3-bedroom. That, you know, doesn't really matter. That there's nothing in the code. And there's nothing about, and I wanted to bring this up and talk to people about what they thought about the potential of some kind of credit if you have some space off street. Of course, it's public right away. The public can park there anytime they want to. It is not reserved for the residents that would live behind that curb. But if you have a 40-foot curb in front of your dwellings, that's a really small curb, and you're going to have a curb cut in there too for additional spaces. But what if you had 100 feet, or what if you had 150 feet frontage? That's a huge amount of frontage where potentially people could park that lived there. So could there be some kind of a credit somehow for that? And Dustin said they have done that in other areas. So that I just wanted to kick off the conversation by kind of some of the information I got from Dustin today to kind of clarify in my mind how this is working. So we've got number of spaces and we've got where the heck are they going to be on the lot. Thoughts on that? Anyone want to jump in? Megan.
I'll try to form my thoughts. are we doing both number and location right now? Or are we just focusing on number?
I just do the number. I think let's just
Okay.
try and keep these
Just to
separated
keep
because
it
it gets, we've got so much to go through and it's really, I think, easier to try and keep it separated a little bit.
Okay, yeah. Then I guess from my end, whether it's this housing type or really anything, we constantly hear that, parking is one of the huge cost drivers for housing. And from my end, I feel like if you have a location that has a bunch of on-street parking, I'm fine with using some of it, because why are we building pavement to not use versus like, let's say you're in my neighborhood and you're going to build one of these middle housing types. Like, I think the developer is going to just know there isn't parking and have to figure out how to fit it on the land. But instead of requiring it everywhere, having it be, on the developer to make that choice of what fits for that property seems like a good way to provide some incentive. Again, like, I want people to be building this instead of a house or townhouse. And so reducing some restrictions and providing an incentive.
You're
Oh, sorry.
kind of underground there. That end of that conversation was kind of underwater.
I just forgot what like reducing costs, providing incentives, and I think limiting the full-on requirement for parking is a huge incentive to build this type of housing versus some of our other code. Seems like a real benefit, and I am supportive.
So you're supportive of the 3/4 of a space. Okay, all right, great. Others? Jessica?
Sorry, Mark. I like staying at the 1 unit per 1 space per unit, like we talked about a couple weeks ago. And, my thought was that to limit what we are pushing to the city streets, I know what we've kind of talked about is that, well, the market probably would build that anyway, but I think just to say that is, what we would like to do. And the mayor's example of if you had 150-foot street frontage, could you count some of the on-street parking? And my thought on that is, if you had 150-foot street frontage, you likely have a very big lot. It's probably not narrow, in which case, if you had a big lot, you're probably going to put a lot of units on it. In the R3, you could get up to 12, and then you would only be putting in 9 parking spots if it was 0.75. And that's where I think that I would still want there to be 12 parking spots, thinking that there are going to be homes with more than 1 car and that they would still need that street frontage. So I like the 1 per unit.
You are muted again, but I'll take that as Mark. Why don't you talk?
Okay, all right. Mark, and then Eric, and then Megan. I think Eric had his hand up. I'm not sure. Okay, go ahead, Mark.
I was just telling you you were muted.
Oh, okay.
My gut is to require 1 spot as well. I guess I'd be curious for a summary of how Planning Commission moved from 1 to 0.75. Was it similar to what Kate and Megan just outlined logically, which was logical?
I think they had a similar kind of spectrum of opinions, from those who believe let the market dictate and allow that, to those who believe we should plan for this. The market is going to deliver some cars, we should anticipate those, versus those who are kind of like allow the developer the creativity and option to do what they see fit and what is best for the site. And so between those, we ended up at 0.75. So that was I think that's my summary. It was a long, involved discussion, but I think that's really kind of where they where they met is we need to accommodate for something. Don't let it drive the design.
So could a developer put an angle in parking and take care of all four in with one curb cut?
On the road.
Yeah.
Angle no, street standards won't allow that. Yeah, we would not allow someone to do angled parking for a residential on a local street. That is just not a curb cut, too big, not allowed by code, not allowed by base code, not allowed by proposed code.
Until that's a good idea, and then we talk about it, right? I don't know if it's a good idea. So I think I'm in favor of one, because I think this is a stressor as it is, and I don't want to make it a double stressor. I'm also, although I'm breaking the rule, I don't know how you don't talk about curb cuts and you do talk about site, parking on site. So those are pretty related to me. So, but I'll say one for this discussion. So.
Is that me? I think I'm starting to, I got your lips read well. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. So the parking issue is obviously a direction. I'm thinking of developers in Hood River like Mike Kitts and Doug Beveridge, who for the last 10 or 15 or 20 years have spent an enormous amount of energy to try to work around the system to get these kinds of results. And to me, this cottage notion is long overdue, and is a path to streamlining that so that folks like that trying to do the right thing in the community can get there without so many hurdles. And I'm also thinking, as a prefatory comment, that this discussion tonight's been really weighing on me. It reminds me a little bit of the vote on the hotel closure, sort of that significance, because I just really want to get it right. And I guess I really am, notwithstanding what I've said, concerned about the parking issue, because I worry that we are possibly trading one problem for another problem, in that if we have people scrambling and sort of kind of claiming ownership rights over these public street parking spaces, it's going to create tensions in our neighborhoods, and really we're forcing an externality on these neighborhoods. And I personally would like to see an approach that the economists speak in these terms, to internalize the externality. We want to have as much off-street parking as we can. Now, I realize what's been said about development costs, and there's always a give and a take, but it's a matter of, I think, trying to right size this and to balance it. I mean, we saw in our materials, we have these photos from folks like Tracy Thomas Paul that kind of shows the congestion that's already happening in areas that have used this model. I spoke with a resident in May Street today near one of the photos, the developments that was in the photo is sort of what we're striving for, already saying that there's neighborhood frictions. And one of the people that lives in the units thinks it's my spot right in front of her house, but it's a public street. So, we do have a quality of life here throughout this code and on this issue as well. So, if it were honestly up to me, which I know it isn't, I probably would be wanting to not adjust the parking ratios at all. And, keep it at 1.5 or 2. I did spend time with staff. It sounds like if we're going to do this, it's not feasible to keep it where it's at. So I have to respect the professionals who are telling me that. So I personally would go above 1.0, but I certainly would go to 1.0 in the spirit of compromise, just because I think we do have, we are a rural sports oriented community where frankly, people have more than one car per household. We have a higher agricultural component to our society than might be, say in the Pearl District. People have more cars here. We are out in rural Oregon. I mean, we're not quite Eastern Oregon, but we're a stair step away, and people drive here to get here, and just people have cars. So I think we should be realistic. You know, that was a word I saw from Ann Frodel, former city councilor, someone I've known almost my whole life. She's telling me in her comment, it's not realistic that we're going to fit all this parking in, and we're going to have, again, we're kind of trading problems for new problems. So I think it's probably a minority view, and I commend the councilors for speaking with one another to try to reach consensus, but I sense that my view of more than 1.0 might be a minority view. So be that as it may, I think I would at least hold it at 1.0.
Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Yes,
Hi.
Gladys.
Yes, we can hear you, Gladys. Go ahead.
Yeah, woohoo. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Dustin, first of all, thank you so much for all your time and effort into this. Rachel as well, Planning Commission, to our developers who are involved, and of course to our public that has called in to give your comments. Please continue to reach out to us and give us feedback as we go along. I want us to think about, as we, you know, we talk about the future of Hood River and what we see for our vision for the future of Hood River. And a lot of staff time and developer time has gone into this. I think that we should leave it at 0.75 and allowing the developer the flexibility and the vision to create this beautiful space that will reduce cost, provide incentives for them to do so. It will also allow for our community to really rely more on our public transportation to get us to and from. So I'd really like for us to think about that as we're talking about less parking. Maybe that is the way that we really normalize that we take public transportation. Maybe we partner with CAT for those individuals that are, you know, there's many ways that I think as a city we could move towards where we really work with public transportation to help with any potential transportation barriers that folks are having concerns about. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gladys. I'll try and I'll ask for you again. And if you're at a place where you can talk, great. Tim?
Thanks, Mayor, and I appreciate all the thoughtful comments of all the other counselors and Dustin's input and the Planning Commission's input. I think for me, the reality of the situation is that we're faced with kind of an intractable problem and that we need to actually provide more housing that costs less. And I think it's pretty clear from all of what we've heard that requiring, and I want to be clear that that's what we're talking about here, we are requiring the parking spots to be built actually adds cost to those developments. So that if we don't require them, that doesn't necessarily mean that they won't be built, if that makes sense for any particular development. So I would err on the not requiring parking spots and kind of letting the market take care of itself. Because it really, you know, if we don't, it's such a hard problem to take care of. I mean, it's obviously, we're having a hard time grappling with it. I think everybody everywhere is having a hard time grappling with it. And so we need to kind of like take an aggressive action towards it, making it more affordable and not more costly. So that's kind of a long-winded way of saying that I would at least 0.75 and maybe not requiring it at all. Honestly, that's kind of where I'm at.
Thank you, Tim. Another split vote here. It looks like we have a three people that would have 0.75 and one that would even have less. We have two people that want 1 and one that wants 1 plus. Megan, did you want to say something else?
I think you're forgetting about Gladys.
No, no, Gladys was the 0.75 and you were both 0.75. And,
You haven't included yourself. Okay.
oh, I haven't included myself, no. And then Tim was 0.75 or less. And then Jessica and Mark were both 1 and Eric was 1 plus. And, you know, I'm on the fence. I could go with 0.75 or 1. I could do either one. I'm thinking about the 4th unit, not having any parking on a 50 by 100 lot. And those other 3 units all have 2 bedrooms. And maybe there's a couple couples. What if somebody has a teenager that has a car? And so I understand the issue. And I also, you know, understand what Tim's talking about. Let the market figure it out in some ways, because if the market doesn't want that, you know, they're like, we're not going to buy something that only has 1 parking space, or we're not going to rent something that has 1 parking space. We've got 3 vehicles, you know, and then people are going to say, you're going to have to put more parking in because it's not going to work. So, you know, I could go either direction on the 0.75 or the 1. I'm worried about, I think since I heard more from more people about the parking issue than any other issue in this whole middle housing discussion, that people were concerned about having enough parking. I think I'm going to say one space per unit.
I also want to highlight that the people that to me have personally reached out are the people that can afford to live in Hood River and can afford to own more than 1 home in Hood River. And I just really want us to think that this middle code housing is not for every single individual that lives in Hood River, for those that are making a certain amount of money plus, right? It's for the working class individuals. So I just want to remind us that this is not the type of housing for everyone.
Right. You know, it'll like, I guess what I was talking about for the market is if builders build it and for some reason that they put in X amount of parking and they don't have buyers, then they will do something different. You know, if it's a big problem. I doubt if it will be a big problem because it's Hood River, people are going to buy it. But so I think you've got, you know, 1.75 or 1. We're a bit mixed, just like the Planning Commission. Are you guys okay with that? Now we got to figure out where we're going to put them. Rachel?
Yeah, Mayor, ultimately we will be bringing code language back. So if we get it wrong, I'm sure you'll tell us, but so that's where we'll leave it today. Clear direction on this one would be helpful. The other one, I think we had a little more work to do. This one really is a number. So at this point, we'll probably, yeah.
All right, well, if this is a, you know, if we actually are going to need to vote, I mean, when we get to the actual hearing, we will be making a motion. And, you know, if we get 4 votes for one direction, we will be going that direction. And if we get 4 votes for a different direction, we'll be going that direction. So, you know, we can put something in the code, Planning Commission can hash it through, they can send it back to us and we can change it again. So.
Right, Planning Commission has already made their recommendation.
Which is
Right.
0.75.
Mhm.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna.
I want to echo that sentiment. I want to really echo that sentiment. I feel like that's gone back and forth a couple of times now. And, you know, I feel that the more we keep running around this, the longer we stall anything from happening.
Well, we'll get through it tonight. We'll get through it tonight. All right, the Planning Commission recommendation is 0.75. I'm gonna go with 0.75. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 people that have said 0.75, 3 people that have said 1. So we'll, Mark?
Yeah, there's been talk about that the market will take care of it. And, you know, when we were downtown, the market does take care of it because those owners, you know, the city controls the parking around the place. And we could say, if you can sell this unit and not have street parking, then knock yourself out. And I completely agree with that. In this case, they're gonna build with less parking, and the city does give them parking. It's just in front of their house or their neighbor's house or the neighbor down the next neighbor's house. So there, I see zero incentive for developers, you know, for the people trying to get it to pencil to put in the, you know, to worry about it. They're going to say, this is a unit, you can park your Sprinter van right in front and you can park your Subaru on one of the 3 of the 4 spaces, kind of thing. I would say that maybe when we get to the more units that we could play with the lot coverage, maybe a tiny bit, or we could say that if parking places are you know, using grass blocks or some permeable surface, that maybe there's a partial credit of square feet for the parking spot based on that. So I still think that unless we're gonna, I think that it should be one, but maybe there's some other things we can do to make it easier for the developer to put the 1. So
Megan?
I guess the other side of Mark's thing, if the market does take care of it, honestly, I think a lot of our parking problem in most neighborhoods is because it's so free and easy to leave 1 vehicle to 4 vehicles in front of your house and your neighbor's house because there's enough parking and enforcing anything. And so you know, whether it's my neighborhood, various friends' neighborhoods, like people are just leaving cars that they honestly shouldn't have and aren't using around because there's no incentive to get rid of it. Which to me says we have capacity, and it probably should be a little more frictiony in some neighborhoods, so people aren't just leaving abandoned vehicles around, or quote unquote working vehicles or whatever that are just sitting pretty regularly.
All right, well, I think we've all kind of given our 2 cents on this. And I'm going to go with 0.75. And so we've got 4 votes for 0.75. And then we'll get it back from Planning Commission, and then we'll see what happens. You know, I know I'm torn with 0.75 and 1, but I'm going to go with 0.75.
Kate, can I clarify, this isn't going back to Planning Commission before it comes to us for the public hearing?
Correct. Planning staff will prep your council's version of this code for your hearing.
Okay, thank you, Dustin.
But the hearing will be with Planning Commission first and then with us, correct?
Oh, Planning
No?
Commission's had its hearing.
Okay, so they won't get it back at all.
Correct.
Okay, all right. I thought they hadn't done their public hearing. I thought they just done a work session on it.
but Kate, we can still bring it up in the public hearing. Is that a truism?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so this is not final. This is not final. All right, now where are we going to put the parking? Planning Commission was split 3-3 on where to put that parking. Is that correct, Dustin?
That's correct. The provision that would prohibit parking between the dwelling units in the street, Planning Commission did not receive a consensus on that. They split 3-3.
And so can you give us their arguments, just a synopsis of the arguments on each side, Dustin?
Yeah, this kind of divides between the difficulty, placing the parking to the side or the rear becomes it's not the path of least resistance. Providing head-in parking directly in garage provided parking is more common now. It's what you see. It's direct access off the street. It provides less grading. So that's part of the ease in which you can do it. That's kind of the one side approach. Current code allows one space right now to be placed in the front yard. It really goes back to fitting a single dwelling where you could have one garage space. The other side of the equation is if you start taking the existing philosophy and multiplying it times 2, 3, and 4, which is commensurate with a unit increase, the impact starts becoming increasingly great on the street, and you start seeing basically head-in parking as your first design feature. So as you have one dwelling unit, one car may be tolerable and it may seem okay. As you have 4 dwelling units, 4 cars, and or larger curb cuts, this impact starts to grow. So and it starts looking less like your idea of compatible traditional neighborhood design. Typically you can imagine one car for one dwelling. This is supposed to start taking some of the design cues from that traditional neighborhood design and following through with that. So how do we manage parking? How do we manage this as an aesthetic and a design feature? So that's really the 3 to 3. So that became my sort of my planning commission impasse of those who wanted to take the path of least resistance, limit some of the driveway on site, to those that said, you're not going to limit the driveway on site, or you're not going to preserve the open space in the back. You're just going to push the dwelling unit further back, and people are going to park up front. It's kind of a net zero proposition. So, and that's where we arrived at the recommendation to you. So staff had provided a recommendation to limit this for the purposes of really promoting a building forward first design and de-emphasizing the impact of this. And we didn't get to a planning commission recommendation on that.
Thanks for that explanation, Dustin. Megan?
Yeah, sorry, I just have a clarifying question for Dustin. If you have a driveway going back, can it be in the 5-foot setback, or do you need to have the setback and then the driveway and then housing and whatever?
5-foot setback would be required on the side. That serves a couple purposes. Separates the parking area and driveway from the neighboring property. Provides a little bit of transition from when you grade the driveway out between properties. If you start placing a driveway immediately to your neighbors, you really don't allow any bounce. And also most likely you're going to sheet flow driveway onto the neighboring property. The side setback allows for landscaping, both trees and shrubs, which hopefully will provide some shade onto that driveway and provide a little buffer between neighboring units.
So in reality, if you put the cars on the side, whether it's a driveway or parking, you have 5 feet, then you have about 9 feet for the driveway. So that's 14 feet of space. And then you can put a dwelling in about 14 feet if you have the driveway on the side. Or parking, driveway / parking. But you can park on that driveway on the side as long as you have that 5-foot buffer, and at least if the car is not in front of the house. But in reality, if you have a driveway that goes back there, won't people park there? I guess if there's a single family dwelling, they might park there, but if there's numerous dwellings in the back, then you can't park there because that's the driveway.
Yeah, you would have to pull out of that. And depending on how it was configured, most likely though, you're not being particularly neighborly if you take up the single driveway and block all your neighbors in. So, or you're that neighbor.
Well, the other thought, I just want to put the other thought out there is, if you have these driveways that go into the back of the house, the longer the driveway, the more asphalt you have, the more runoff you have, the more impervious surface you have, the more heat you have with, asphalt, concrete. So there's always, some of those things that you need to think about. Ideas. People have a preference of whether you shouldn't. Right now, you can. The zoning says you can park a or more than one car in front of your house, basically. And the recommendation by staff and the split was that you cannot do that. So, but right now we say you can park one car in front of your house. So that's a question. Do we want to change that?
Is that one car per unit or just one car total?
But the base zone is written to where we require two parking places for each dwelling unit. One of those may be allowed within the front yard setback. So that's where you see a single family home will have one in the garage and one on front. That's where you see each townhome. When you have a townhome building, townhome one in the garage, each one of them one in front.
So I'm gonna be stupid maybe, but I guess, so let's say you have 3 units, 2 in front, 1 behind, and you have 3 cars, 1 for each unit in the front setback, or like under our current code, is that how you would read that? Or
We can't hear you.
I don't know what's going
Lean
on.
forward.
Just get right up there. If you have 3 units on the lot, even if they're not up, near the setback, would you interpret our current code to say that you get 1 car per unit can be in that 10-foot front yard setback?
Yeah, if you had a townhouse code or townhouse where you had 3 units and each of them had 2 parking spaces required each one of those units could place a car in the front yard setback.
Okay, so even if one of the houses is like on the other end of the lot, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I haven't seen that happen, but if you look, I think the example would be Wasco. Wasco between 7th and 13th is essentially how that plays out.
Okay.
But that's what's allowed right now. Okay.
Because that's what's allowed, yeah.
Okay.
So do we want to change that?
Well,
That's
since
the
I'm
question.
unmuted, I'll probably ramble for a minute, and I'll get close to my screen again. So I see why we wouldn't want 4 cars directly in front of the lot for streetscape aspect, but I also don't love the idea that we're just having a bunch of kind of wasted asphalt that is for driving uses but isn't for parking or something else to just shoot behind. Because I do think for folks living on these lots, as much, and I know we have the rules about lot coverage, but as much as it's not just pavement, but is, something nice to live with, and I don't think anyone particularly loves pavement in any part of their life, I think is better for the folks living there. And so balancing what is it? Is it better for folks viewing it from the street, or is it better for the folks living on the property? I think is an important conversation. So I feel like I'd be fine with 1 or 2 vehicles in the front setback, but not, 1 per unit necessarily. And I know I'm talking about a 4-unit or 8-unit type thing, but something that gives flexibility and some option that is more in line with what our current neighborhoods definitely look like 1 to 2 cars in front of a property. And I don't think that's a huge issue or visual problem. So balancing what we currently have, but not allowing it to turn into just full parking lot for the entire frontage, I guess.
So I think there was a suggestion at one point in the planning commission meeting, I remember, that that there was suggestion about a percentage, like for instance, you know, if you had a 50-foot wide lot, you know, X percentage could be allowed to be parked in. You know, and if you have a wider lot, then of course that would be bigger because you have a wider lot. But to use a percentage number, and whatever that percentage would be is like, I don't know what that percentage is, but maybe something that would be, you know, a percentage of a 50 by 100 lot. How long is a car? What is that percentage? And that would allow one car. And I think that's kind of a compromise to do that, to do it that way myself. Other thoughts? Mark?
Yeah, I'm just, I think that every curb cut is another car and a half that you can't get on the curb. So to me, if you had 0.75 and 4 units, three curb cuts and 1 unit with no parking, there's nowhere for them to park on the street anymore, right? So I don't know.
Mark, I don't think they're going to allow 3 curb cuts. You're going to get 1 curb cut regardless. That's all
No.
you're going to get.
What I'm,
Is that right, Dustin?
Yeah, it's that's how it's written into the code now. 1 curb cut per frontage, 14-foot width max, which we would have to adjust if we're going to allow for more than 1 parking space in the front. I mean, that's that those standards will not hold if we start allowing or permitting more than 1 space in the front.
so that's per unit frontage, not per site frontage.
Per dwelling site. All your units get 1 curb cut.
Oh, okay. Well, that's where I thought this discussion was going to curb cut per unit, and I was going, ah. So if there's only 1 curb cut per site and there's 4 units, how I don't see what the alternative is except for having, so that like you drive in and then there's 4 parking spots right there. Is that how it would work?
It wouldn't be in front between the dwelling and the street. So that would be something where if it's split down the middle, there's a configuration that shows them, you know, being split off that single driveway. To the side, it would be tuck under parking where you had a single driveway for all your units. And
Right, I'm looking at those 2 figures.
Yep.
Um,
Or if it was shared between the units.
so so that makes sense to me, but I thought the alternative was you're not consolidating driveway and it's more driveway per unit. Maybe I misunderstood the whole thing.
I think there's just a concern that being so scripted and not allowing this is going to create design difficulties.
And what's the alternative besides these 2 figures?
I will be working on that for for Monday's public hearing, providing some options of what's between nothing and, you know, to come up with something for you.
So I guess maybe it's a question for Megan, who is worried about a big big driveway asphalt. I thought there was an alternative we were talking about, but maybe not. So
I think the alternative was you have 1 curb cut, and does everybody drive to the side or the back? Or do you potentially allow 1 vehicle to park between the first dwelling and the street? And then basically the rest, if you had 4 units, would have to drive to the back anyway. Do I have that right, Dustin?
Well, I don't have to go to the back. They just can't be in the setback.
They just can't be in the setback in between the street and the house.
Yeah, if there's a consideration to allow 1 as is, I'm just gonna have to make some adjustments on how that'll look. And I could craft that up to show you how that could work. If there's some flexibility, if you were looking for a spectrum of what we have now versus not.
And if I could, Mayor, maybe one question to consider here is, is there a goal to limit curb cuts? Because that will really restrict, or the width of curb cuts, because that will really restrict what can happen on site. So answering that question would, I think, be helpful to Dustin.
Are you saying answering the question regarding curb cuts or the parking thing?
Regarding curb cuts, because
Regarding
that's ultimately what's going to dictate where the parking can go.
Okay.
And so if everybody, I think what we've heard is everybody is comfortable with a 14-foot curb cut. There's less comfort with getting bigger because that reduces the amount of parking on the street. However, if that's not the case, then it would be helpful for us to get some input, because that would, if there's a bigger curb cut, it will allow more parking up front.
Jessica and then Megan.
I just want to have one curb cut, and I was fine with having the parking be on the side and the back. I was, kind of thinking about the conversation, do we let one in front? But I definitely only want one curb cut.
Megan?
But, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe my question for next time is, I don't know enough about curb cuts to say a 14, like, I think just one per frontage makes sense for, keeping as much on-street parking as possible, but I don't know if 14 feet is the right size, I guess, because I don't know enough about what that means or how different it is from, I guess, a normal house right now.
Yeah, I could tell you normal house right now, maximum's 19 feet, which is essentially 2 parking spaces side by side. That's what we would allow today, but that's again accommodating a single dwelling. You see that with a single family home, curb cut of 19 feet allows essentially 2 head-in parking spaces.
And I guess, so on-street parking, what is considered like one parking length of curb for a car?
We don't have a standard, but I would say generally you would look at between 20 and 24 feet.
Okay, so like 19 feet would still be like one parking space removed.
One parking space plus we have
Sightlines and, okay.
the sightlines and some, how would you call it? The return and radius aprons for ADA accessibility and drainage. So it ends up, it's 19 foot to the throat, then it becomes, it branches out a little bit beyond that.
Okay, so like more than 25 feet or?
I would consider it a loss of at least 1, if not 2 spaces.
Okay.
Because your willingness to park, your bumper right on somebody's driveway is, it's not really the Hood River model. It does work elsewhere and is accepted, but.
Okay, thank you, Dustin.
And I think, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Rachel. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I think what I'm hearing, Dustin, is there's maybe a desire as we go into the public hearing to make these visual so that we can really, so that the council can see the impacts and the public can see the potential impacts, and then that might help make a decision about how we want to move forward. And I think we can do that.
Yeah, I think that one curb cut is preferred, because then you have more parking on the street and less issues for people walking and pushing the stroller and different things like that. So I think that the preferred method would be to have one curb cut in general. I'm not against having one parking space in front, but because that's kind of what we have now in general. So it seems like it kind of makes it a level playing field with everything else we're doing. But if we have numerous units, all the rest of them are going to have to be on the side of the back. So, we're still going to have asphalt that goes into the back regardless. Well, that's my thoughts. Gladys, were you, I thought maybe I saw Gladys trying to get on, but I'll check with you again.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Talk just a little bit louder, Gladys.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like I'm yelling. I would like to limit the curb cuts. We heard from a builder and developer, fewer curb cuts or safer streets. So I'm going to take that expert's opinion. What that magic number is, I'm not sure, but Dustin, I'm sure that you'll go back and figure out good numbers and visuals to show us.
Okay. Do you think you have enough input, Dustin, or are we not?
Yep. No, I'll be able to come up with some options for you. Again, kind of on the spectrum of from nothing to more, and what with a single curb cut emphasis. So we're looking at a single curb cut. What are our potential configurations that could occur off that for a small multi-unit on site? I can work.
Okay. All right. Other counselors that haven't, want to give more input that haven't, or anyone else? Eric, and
So,
then Tim.
yeah, just very briefly. I mean, I'm obviously keeping an open mind through all this leading to the public hearing, which, because we haven't heard from the public yet, but on this particular issue under discussion, my view would be to have the most flexibility we can and trying to get as much parking off the street as we can. I would be in favor of allowing, of not regulating to exclude the possibility of a parking space out front to give flexibility during the design process.
Tim.
Thanks, Mayor. I guess my order of preference would be to not require parking, first of all, and then if you're going to require parking, to have just one curb cut. And if there's a concern about the impervious surface, that we would either strongly encourage or require some type of grasscrete or some other type of permeable driveway surface.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. All right, we've gotten through these two hard ones, I think, are the ones that we really needed to get some clarity on, as clear as we could get. So we have required, you had a couple other ones of these, Dustin, that you'd given us. And one was required site area per unit by zone. Was that something you wanted us to discuss? And then the stormwater, the number G, stormwater, low impact development, landscaping, and tree preservation? Were those the two?
Mayor, not necessarily.
Not necessarily,
I think
okay.
at this point, we would just open it up for any other council discussion.
Okay.
There were no other points where there was really, there wasn't
Clarity needed.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's just open it up for additional comments or questions or ideas regarding the whole thing. Anything in there? I know you guys are just dying to get something said. Megan.
Why not? So I guess one of the things that stood out to me, looking at this and the little graph on page 69, super helpful. But is that we've got the like density bonus for units under 800 square feet in the R2 and the R3, but we don't have that in R1. And I would get it's probably, a different square foot per unit thing, given the, low density versus high density type thing. But would we not, is there a reason, did Planning Commission talk about like why we wouldn't want to be incentivizing smaller units in R1?
No, I think it was really based on some of the direction that we took from council early on to basically entertain the idea of having a duplex in that area and not necessarily taking it beyond that. So I don't think it was necessarily something that we fully invested in. The smaller unit bonus came up during the hearing. It wasn't the initial draft. That was something that Planning Commission added. It just wasn't it was an add in the R2 and R3 to incentivize there, not necessarily, it just wasn't suggested in R1. It wasn't necessarily evaluated and refuted, but it just was not the recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Dustin. I guess from my end, I'd like us to maybe look at that or talk about it. You know, all this missing middle housing stuff is super needed housing that we're really not building in town. But I think especially, you know, when I talk to folks in my demographic, like these smaller units in the 600 to 800 square feet realm, or like there's just nothing in town to that size, and it's something a lot of people really want. You know, whether they're single or just a couple. Both for cost and for just housing type and size. And I'd love to see us promote that in all of our zones, in addition to promoting all of this middle housing to the various sizes, because I mean, they're all needed, of course. But I think there is benefit to pushing for some of these small units in particular.
So on that line, Dustin, question on the R1, one dwelling per 2,500 square feet. So, you know, if you had a 5,000 square foot lot, that's just two, but they could be any size. Is that true? Any square footage?
1,500 and less.
Oh, it still is the 1,500 and less. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that's 1,500 now with an attached garage, 1,200 without attached garage.
Okay. Because it doesn't, under the R1, it doesn't say that, but that's what it is. Okay,
Yeah,
right.
It's one dwelling unit for every 2,500, and then later in the code, it's where it mentions our dwelling unit cap size. That's
Okay,
applicable.
all right. Thanks for that clarification. Others that want to, I don't know if we have anything else, or if you want to tag on to Megan's comment and comment on that either way. Mark?
Yeah, I don't disagree with Megan at all, but I think the making sure that we're writing a rule set that pencils for the people that are actually going to be building this, since we don't, is important. So I don't know if that's the carrots discussion that's going to follow this code stuff, or whether it's the code itself that needs to just be maximally flexible, so that if the market demand says, I want, a bunch of 800 square foot pieces on here, or 600 square foot pieces, and here's how you'll make as much money as, McMansion, then I'm supportive. But are we looking at the pencilability as part of this, or is it separate from this exercise? I hope it's part of it.
We had some of our developers look at it by way, we didn't have a cost comparison. They were looking at some of the, could you get a return on it? But we didn't get into the nuance of if you required or allowed 6 800 square foot units on an R1 lot. Really, we kind of stuck with some of the conventions of this would be a 2 dwelling unit, going from 1 permitted dwelling to 2. That was really kind of the impetus that behind that. So we didn't drive it any further. We did include a cottage provision, which would allow up to 6 detached cottages in R1, depending, using that area. But that was something that was just considered is permissible now. It's not allowed, but we didn't do a full analysis of whether this was 800 square foot. They would all be less than 15. That's the kind of the sidebars we put on it.
And I always felt like the incentive for builders to do this was these changes, and that they're outright, that they get more doors, per lot. And yes, there's a square footage limitation on them, but they'd be able to do more doors, basically more units. And it's outright. It's not a long protracted process through a PUD that, every neighbor's making a comment on. And so I think that was the incentive. And that's what I had heard from anyone I'd talked to that was builders were going, yeah, this is, it's what Mike and Greg had done for years. And they went through all the hoops to do it, but this is, you know, allowing us to be able to do it without going through all the hoops. So that was the incentive. Jessica?
I would like to keep the R1 as it is without those density bonuses in the R2 and the R3, because I do think, you know, like what we've talked about is that R1 going to a duplex is going to be a big change. And just trying to ease these into the city. And also, you know, looking at a map, most of the city is R2 and R3. There's a very small part of the city that is an R1. So I think that this is going to impact most of the city anyway. I mean, the density bonus thing. I mean, it is impacting all of the city. I was gonna say one of the things that I guess I just had been looking at and, you know, trying to wrap my head around is because the last time we talked about it, we had less lot coverage allowed. And I guess I was still kind of leaning towards that versus how the planning commission went, although it's, you know, some of them it's not that much different. You know, and I know like the difference between, okay, well now landscaping is required, so maybe it balances out, you know, perhaps it does, but I guess just to share something that I'm thinking about.
I just wanted to mention that the one, I think it was called 1 for 1 for the tree retention. I really thought that was a fantastic idea. That, you know, if you retained, there's an incentive to retain mature trees, so you don't have to put in more. Because, you know, there's just so much better to have a mature tree if you can save it. So I really applaud that, having that in here. I think that is going to hopefully help us be able to retain, you know, additional trees on properties. Other questions, comments? Eric and then Megan.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess I had a couple thoughts, or just ideas to float, maybe to just consider as we go into the public hearing, which I understand will be next week. But before I get to those, sort of what's motivating, just points of concern for me on this. There's really two. One, there really is a quality of life issue here. And, you know, we don't know how significant the actual densification may or may not actually play out to be in light of market forces and other factors. But there is a possibility under this code change to see a significant increase in impervious surfaces, an incentive to, and I agree with the mayor's comment about the trees. We want to try to save as many as we can. The reality is that if we have more land going to housing, you have a possibility of loss of trees, loss of play space for children, the idea of a backyard kind of disappearing, more cars on the roads, which I've heard some people say, not tonight, but that actually makes it harder to bike around town because we have more cars on the sides and then the cars driving in the middle of the road. It's actually more difficult to bike. So there's a quality of life issue at some point, depending on how significant the development is. And then the other kind of motivating factor for me, a point of concern, I should say, is will this solve the problem? The problem is I think what I believe the problem is that we have outpriced our people. We've outpriced our community for homes. And it's driven, I think, by kind of the nationalization of Hood River is a beautiful place and just this national interest here. And it's too bad. As someone like a lot of us, I know the mayor, I think Gladys, we all grew up here, and we want to enable the next generation to live here. But will increasing supply decrease demand? That seems like that's an unspoken premise of this, and I'm not sure it will. That's why some of our other things we're doing, like Rand Road, doing what we can on other fronts to have multifamily for-profit, market-based, multifamily, more apartment houses would be wonderful in my idea. And I know that's different, but there are other ways for us to achieve our goals as well. But will this actually solve the problem? I'm not sure that increasing supply will decrease demand. And we may see that we're building this and kind of losing elbow space for the benefit of Portland homebuyers. I don't know. But and I also don't know, that also might be completely false. So I don't want to speculate and be seen to be speculating only one way. That might be a false fear. So I had two thoughts, just and folks can take these for what they are. And I'm not even convinced myself that they're good ideas, but they just seem like to at least merit a throw out, which is, first of all, in case there are some unintended consequences of this bill, should we pass it, to have a 5-year look, a 5-year timeout, or maybe just have it lapse after 5 years. Of course, it'd be renewable by the council at that time, just in case this spirals into something. It might give people some comfort too, to say, we're going to look at this in 5 years and force the 5-year look by having it expire or having some other device. It's just an idea. I know that's nowhere in the code. It's nowhere in anything Planning Commission talked about, but if there are these unintended consequences, having a lifeline there is something to think about in terms of a 5-year look. And the second thing is, and it ties in a little bit to what Councilor Mehta said, but it probably goes, well, it would go a step further in terms of not only holding the line at R1, and I know this came up nowhere in the discussions, but a possibility would be to decouple R1 altogether from this, with the thought that maybe we should consider aligning our policies with sort of the consumers. And there is something to be said about having, there's a diversity of lifestyle preferences and maybe a density and difference curve out there somewhere that might think that people that bought R1 bought that with a certain sense of elbow room with their neighbors. People that bought R2 may have a different sense, and people that bought R3 might have even had a different sense. So by considering at least the possibility of excluding altogether R1 from this, it's, as Jessica pointed out, it's a smaller proportion of the entire inventory, the land inventory generally in our city. So it would be less. And I just think there's an alignment there of consumers with policy outcomes to say these people have bought here, maybe thinking they'd want some more elbow room than other areas that if you buy R2 or buy R3, like my house bets R3 on both sides. So I bought that with my eyes wide open, and that's wonderful. But some people might not, see it that way. And so I just see it as a possible way of aligning policies with the consumers. Now there is House Bill 2001. So we would acknowledge that if this idea, and this idea might be dead on arrival, but if someone was to consider this idea, we probably want to say, well, and if House Bill 2001 were to kick in for Hood River, I think at 10,000, then that would not apply. But I guess my thought is, going to the public hearing, quality of life issues, kind of market concerns of not really solving the problem, lead me to want to have a little bit of reservation here. I would go in guns blazing, perhaps in some of the other categories, but R1 and maybe a 5-year look is just ideas that I just throw out there for consideration. Thank you.
All right. Megan?
I had the thing I was going to talk about, but I feel like I just want to address some other things of my read of, maybe it's not in city limits now, but most of the available land in the urban growth boundary at this point is R1. And that is the huge area that we are going to be growing into and need to be using efficiently. So I think it's odd to say that we don't have very much and it doesn't matter what we do with that zone. To that same realm, R1 means low density versus standard or high. And I think this code already addresses some of that, where it has lower lot coverage and higher landscape area. It has a higher, square footage per unit requirement than the R2 and R3. We've already built in that it is lower density, but I think the other side of that is, whether it's the House Bill 2001, or we got multiple comments talking about the equity issues of R1 being exclusive to single family. And there's been larger conversations nationally that R1, you know, I get it's lower density, but excluding house types from R1 excludes certain people from R1, even if it's at a lower density. And I'm not super comfortable with that. And I would, you know, I get it's lower density, but I would like to figure out if there's ways to, you know, not just do a duplex, but look at a triplex or other things that allow these smaller units that are going to be the same mass as a large house on a large lot, but are going to allow more people to access that area of town.
I wholeheartedly agree with that comment, and I will also state that we cannot continue to segregate individuals, especially those who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic status. And when we think of quality of life, that we think of quality of life for all that reside within Hood River. All of our working class who were on this call tonight to say that they are interested in this type of housing because they are the ones who are working to sustain our community, and this is for them.
Okay. Others on the R1 or any of these other numbers, you know, in the zones that we've got down on this chart on page 48. That's what we're talking about right now, anyway. I'm okay with R1 being the way it is. I would consider changing it to the same as it is in R2 and R3. I think House Bill, was it 2001? It will affect us sooner than later. It's, you know, we're going to grow to be 10,000 and then it's going to be 2 units. And I think the funny thing is we already allow 2 units in the R1. We already allow ADUs. So we already allow 2 units in the R1. You know, it's not a big stretch to at all because we already allow that. So I don't think it's going to be a huge change. And, you know, with the bigger lots, if you don't want to put 2 units on your place, fine. You know, that's totally, you don't have to. But I think not being given the opportunity to, you know, I think some of this R1 zoning that was originally put in all over the country, single family, that excluded other kinds of housing, that was the problem. That's what exacerbated the inequities that were happening within the housing industry. So, I mean, I'm okay with keeping it where it is right now, personally, but I'm not against, you know, thinking about changing that too. So that's the same as R2 and R3. That's my own opinion. Others? Anything else on it? No? Okay, great. Is there any other items? I've got one item that I wanted to bring up that was in here, I believe. Does anybody else have any other items? No? Okay. The alley buffer yard. I know it's kind of an odd one, but the reason I bring it up is I'm not sure the purpose of it. And, you know, there's a preference in here that if you have an alley, and since I've built 2 ADUs on alleys, that's the reason I kind of know a little bit about it. And one of them we built has 1 parking space. It's not even required. But we put one in because we thought it was prudent to have 1 parking space off the alley because that's where the front door comes in, is off the alley. But we have I believe over half, well, way over half. We've got about 30 feet of landscaping in front of the house. And then there's just a little 10-foot wide or 9-foot wide area that is paved to head in park there. Then we have another one that has an alley, and then you pull in right beside the house, and there is no landscaping there, but the house faces a different direction. And I'm not sure about, you know, having this landscaping buffer next to the parking. You can put the parking right next to the alley if you want to, but then you have to have this 5 feet of landscaping before you come to the house. Is that correct, Dustin? That's what that's talking about on page 49 of our packet?
Yes, I was just looking on page 48. So the buffer yards also serve as a setback. So the idea that that this would require buildings to be set back from the alley right away. This is essentially what provides that that separation. So there's no unique setback from an alley, or this sets the setback from an alley for structures, and it allows parking to go in it. So that's part of the purpose of the landscape yard. Whether it needs to be planted as such, I think there's probably some wiggle room there, but really when it comes to your alleys, this is the one provision that provides a setback for a structure. Say if you had a garage adjacent to the alley or a building getting close to the alley, community building, this 5 feet is landscape area is what provides that setback. Whether it's planted or not, I guess that's kind of maybe a secondary approach, but this is the primary approach that this yard provides that.
But if you have parking, if that is your parking space that's right next to the alley, this requirement would add another 5 feet of landscaping between that parking spot and your dwelling. In addition to the 9 or 10 feet wide area, or if it was head-in parking, it would be 20 feet, 18 feet, or up to 20 feet. Then it would be another 5 feet on top of that.
Yeah, it'd be 5 feet on top of that. That's where it talks about it can be adjacent to the right of way, or if you have parking head in, it could be relocated. It provides a 5 foot separation between surface parking space and a structure, dwelling unit.
And I guess I was trying to figure out what the purpose is. You know, I'm not, you park and you want to get into your house as quick as you can. And is it an area you would use ostensibly for the owner of that house to use, or is it more something for aesthetics for the neighbor? I guess that's my question.
It could be both. It also could serve if you have surface parking that is head in off an alley. It would also provide, I'd call it like a bumper overhang. That if 5 feet between your parking space and your unit, it would be something where hopefully you wouldn't necessarily be driving your car right into your house, or preventing that. Not that anyone has ever done that, but it allows some flexibility in where it would be transferred. So if you had that surface head-in parking, so whether it's surface drainage, whether it's aesthetics, it just provides a little wiggle room there between head-in parking off the alley.
Okay. I mean, in the instances that I had worked with an ADU, which is not this code, but you know, it was a small 800 square foot house with a current dwelling already on those, especially the recent one, it would have likely precluded us from building it if we'd had another 5 feet that we had to deal with. If we wanted to have any parking back there at all. So the second thing would have been is we would have had more on-street parking because it wasn't required for an ADU. You know, that would have been another car parking in the front on the street, which could have been done because it was allowed, but just, you know, I'm not sure if that 5 feet of that landscaping would be, you know, what the trade-offs for doing that were worth it. So I wanted to bring it up and see if anyone had any other comments or thoughts about it. I don't think it's necessary, but others can chime in on it.
And like the other pieces, we can bring an exhibit back to show how this works too, to provide an illustrative.
Okay, that might be great. I think that would be helpful. Other thoughts, questions? No? Okay. Well, we're gonna see this next Monday, Dustin? Is that right?
I think you're gonna see this next Thursday, and you will have a public hearing on Monday. So we'll have a
Okay.
prepared prior with revisions,
Oh, Thursday, okay, in our packet.
including the ordinance, but yes, it'll be a matter on for public hearing. I believe it's prior to your regular business on Monday.
Okay. And then we'll have more on stormwater next week too.
Is the expectation that we'll get all the way through the public hearing and on the one meeting on Monday?
Hopefully, I think, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, after a couple hours of discussion and meeting number 12, I'm hoping we make some significant progress. So.
All right, that's it. Oh, another long one, 9:45. But thank you everyone for chiming in. Good discussion. Split decisions on some stuff, just like the planning commission had, are hard decisions. So, but thank you for all your input. Thanks for joining us, Gladys, on your drive. We will see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Really
everyone.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah, good night.
we are adjourned.